Howdy folks! Welcome back to the Stick Figure Historian American series. On the bustling street of San Antonio, Texas, stands a building somewhat out of place from its newer surroundings. Or perhaps it's better to say that which is left of a building. The little sun-beaten limestone chapel standing here is actually the last remaining portion of a Spanish mission. One of those big fort-like structures that had been built in the early days of the Spanish colonization of the Americas. It is called the Alamo. But when the Alamo was born in 1718, that's not what the builders called her. Her first name was San Antonio de Valero. The first part of the name came from the Catholic saint Anthony of Padua, because the Spanish name for Anthony is Antonio. And the second from this extremely ugly individual here, the viceroy of the Spanish colonies, Baltazar de Zuniga, Marquess of Valero, or Valero, however you say it. I'm not real good with my Spanish words, I'm sorry. You'll just have to bear with me here. For many years, the limestone walls of the mission housed the fat little priests and the poor Indian workers who tended the crops and animals, or toiled at cloth manufacturing. It was a simple first 75 years of existence. Then, one day, the priests left, and it was abandoned to the wilderness for a time. It was after this that the mission began its second, more exciting life. You see, it had been built so strongly to protect against the attacks of the fierce Comanche and Apache Indian raiders that the government of Spain saw that it would make a perfect fort. San Antonio de Valero now became home to a regiment of Spanish troops. These soldiers gave the place its new and lasting name of Alamo, which means cottonwood trees. Perhaps there were many of those shady trees near the mission in those long ago days, and the soldiers were happy to seek shelter beneath them from the relentless southwestern sun. And as that sun day by day kept its faithful course, the city of San Antonio began to grow around the Alamo. But what of this Alamo? Why is it that folks from all over the country come to visit this chapel that is left of it? Why are we constantly told that we must remember it? Isn't it just like any other Spanish mission or army headquarters elsewhere in the southwest of America? There is nothing at first sight to mark the Alamo as anything special, but its crumbling walls are the crypt of a very important story. Within the ruins lies the story of Texas, the story of how she became what she is today, rather than a territory of Mexico. It's a rather long tale, but I think you'll enjoy it. Now, as I said before concerning missions, these were the big strongholds that the Spanish built wherever they went to make colonies in the Americas. The Spanish used the missions as bases from which to convert the local peoples to Catholicism, and then use those people like slaves to grow their food and make things to sell. One of the major exports of these missions, particularly the ones in South America, was sugar. There's a lot of sad stories of injustice surrounding these places, but I can't get into detail right now. Anyway, since San Antonio de Valero was a Spanish mission, that meant she was in Spanish territory. And that is just what Texas was. Just another part of New Spain. New Spain it was called, but not by all. There were many Americans who thought that Texas should be theirs. Ever since the days of the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, which is outlined in green on this map, many Americans insisted that the little strip of land west of the Sabine River was theirs as part of the contract. And here's a map of the Sabine River. You can see how it marks the boundaries of Louisiana and Texas. It wasn't true that the land west of this river was America's, for the Louisiana Purchase was made from France, and really had nothing at all to do with Spain. But it didn't matter to these Americans. There were many parts of Texas that were a farmer's or rancher's dream come true. Black, fertile ground just bursting with opportunity. Endless swaths of grasslands to grow plump beef for the markets of the East. But as much as these Americans could gripe and make their claims to the strip of land along the Sabine River, it wasn't going to do any good so long as neither Spain nor Congress acknowledged them. It was in 1812 that these greedy Americans got their first chance to try for Texas. New Spain was in an uproar. They had rebelled against the king of Old Spain, Ferdinand VII. They wanted to be their own nation. They wanted to be New Spain no longer, but Mexico, the navel of the moon. Yep, according to some sources, that's what Mexico means. Kind of weird. I mean, I don't think the moon has a belly button. But I guess the meaning of Mexico is actually debated. Some people think it means the middle of a century plant. And then there's other people that think it's based off a secret name for this freakazoid Mexican deity here, Meztli. But, whatever the name means, point is, this was a war for independence. Things didn't go so well in the beginning for the Mexicans, however. Several of their leaders were soon executed, and the armies fell apart. But there was one young fellow, by the name of Bernardo Gutierrez de Lara, who fled to America. Bernardo did not wish to waste his time sulking in exile. He wanted his country to be free, and he believed in that cause with all his heart. He had only 21 Tejanos to follow him when he had first begun to fight the Spanish. And just so you know for future reference, Tejanos are what the native Spanish people of Texas were called. Bernardo did not let the small numbers stop him from doing great things. And in time, those numbers grew. And they had grown considerably when he had convinced the Indians in the area to come and help the Tejanos fight the Spanish too. He was confident that now he could win the Americans to their side. Bernardo went to Congress in Washington, D.C., and asked for money and men to renew the struggle in Texas. But Congress wouldn't listen to the young revolutionary. It wasn't that they were disinterested, exactly. It was just that they were currently in the middle of a war with Britain again, and to make Spain angry would be a most unwise thing to do, you see. But Bernardo refused to return to Texas empty-handed. He appealed to the American people for aid instead. And he found a supporter in a disgruntled lieutenant named Augustus McGee. McGee had been an artillery officer before faithfully serving in Louisiana, keeping the peace among the settlers there and busting various outlaws. That was all very well, but McGee wished for more than just a simple life of a lieutenant. One day, someone had recommended that he should be promoted, but when the time came, he was passed over. This had embittered McGee, and the restlessness of before festered. So when Bernardo came along with promises of adventure as a freedom fighter in Texas, McGee was more than ready. No matter if he would be breaking the Neutrality Act. Perhaps he never planned to come back to America. Surely there was money, land, and fame enough to be won in Texas. He gathered a small force of any Louisianians who cared to join him, and placed himself and Bernardo in joint command over them. Things went well for the Mexican and American commanders. For a time. They took a town, and later a fort. A pretty cool-looking fort, actually. Until the Spanish royalists caught up with them and besieged them in it. It is here that McGee's confidence failed him. He even offered to surrender to the Spanish commander if he would let him and his Louisianians go. As for their Mexican comrades, well, they would be left to the bloody revenge of the Spanish royalists. Thankfully, McGee's men would not hear of this kind of surrender, and when the coward perished from an illness shortly thereafter, they kept on fighting under a new commander. The Spanish royalists never did take that fort, and Bernardo and his Louisianians continued to win more victories in Texas. Bernardo even declared himself governor of Texas. But it was too few against too many. Eventually, not even a full year after the new Texan revolt had begun, it was crushed at the Battle of Medina. And I do mean crushed. Out of the 1,400 revolutionary troops, all were slain save for a mere 100 men. Butchery was the order of the day. Men were cut down trying to surrender. Mexicans, Americans, both died together. And several more hundred Mexican leaders were executed in the aftermath. There was a young royalist officer present on the field of Medina that commands our particular interest, for he shall appear sometime later in our story. This bloody day was counted as a golden day in his estimation, for his commanders had marked his bravery during the battle and had selected him to be promoted. But the images and methods of wholesale slaughter made quite an impression upon this young man's mind, perhaps more than he realized at the time. His name was Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, and his story would become one with that of the Alamo in the years to come, as we shall see. In any case, when the Gutierrez-McGee expedition met its horrible end, the Americans still had no part of the land west of the Sabine River, and the southwestern sun kept on its course. The dreams of the farmers and ranchers would have to lie unrealized for now.